Welcome to the Mets pod. Well, we recorded a great episode for you guys. We went over everything in the clubhouse, everything going on around the league, answered your mailbag questions, and don't worry, we even go down on the farm. But then shortly after recording, the Mets signed Devin Williams to a 3-year deal. So you'll hear Joe and I's reaction to all of that on a separate reaction right at the top of the show. And don't worry, stick around right after that for our normal show. So subscribe to the Mets pod at Apple Podcast, Spotify. You could always watch us on SNY's YouTube channel or wherever you get your shows. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets pod. The Mets have made a big move. They signed Devin Williams to a 3-year deal, totaling over $50 million. Joe and I will get into the specifics of this exact contract because the Mets have pulled a playbook, a page out of the Dodgers playbook, and included some deferred money in here as well. But, Joe, let's stick with the player right off the top here. A phenomenal career in Milwaukee. David Stearns knows a thing or two about him. A down, then up year with the Yankees where he started to figure some things out after a rocky start. Now a New York Met for what we expect to be a 3-year deal. Joe, what's your reaction?
I mean, man, it's very interesting when you see, because the initial reaction is going to be, well, there goes Edwin Diaz. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But Devin Williams, this is a guy that David Stearns is familiar with in his time with Milwaukee. Devin Williams has been a setup man before in Milwaukee. He ended up kind of not by choice, but becoming a setup man with the Yankees to some degree in 2025. And later on in the show, you will hear us talk about Dylan Cease and how modern front offices don't really care much about ERA. So yeah, Devin Williams posted an ERA of 4.79. You read that, you're not too excited, but you look under the hood. Expected ERA 3.09. Expected batting average against under 200. And ultimately, this is a guy that still gets strikeouts and whiffs and generates chase at some of the highest levels in baseball, strikeout rate of almost 35%. The airbender is still disgusting. The fastball is still a plus pitch. The Mets are setting themselves up, as you said, not unlike the Dodgers, to sign a guy like Devin Williams. And we'll like I said, we'll talk about Diaz, but this is a significant move in building a bullpen that is geared towards winning a World Series.
Yeah, this is someone that, I mean, it sounds crazy to say because he's still getting high-end reliever money, but there is a discount here because it was not the perfect dream season that he was hoping to have with the Yankees. But as you pointed out, Joe, the reason the baseball world is still really high on Devin Williams is the stuff is still really good. You know, some of his, obviously swing and miss stuff, especially that changeup, is really, really high-end. And it's interesting, Devin Williams, after once again that rocky season in New York, chose to stay in New York. He just comes crosstown to Queens. And I think it's always tough to evaluate a move like this, much like we said with the Brandon Nimmo trade, just in a vacuum, because I look at this move in a way of, man, if Edwin Diaz is also back and you got a 1-2 punch of Devin Williams and Edwin Diaz, I think this is a phenomenal move, especially with the deferments, getting it down to closer to $14 million per year. I mean, you're essentially looking at kind of the Ryan Helsley number just with another year added on, which sounds insane to say. But if Edwin Diaz is not back, and I truthfully think the Mets don't know right now, Edwin Diaz might have an offer out there when the winter meetings start or whatever it may be that the Mets just aren't comfortable going to, or they might be letting him kind of sit through his market right now because they think this will all work out for him to come right back into Citi Field, entering the field of Timmy Trumpet. So I'm not going to give this some A+ right now, Joe, because I think it's far from complete. But I like the way the contract is laid out, and I'm a big believer in a Devin Williams bounce back season.
I want to make it very clear that this should not be the Edwin Diaz replacement. This should be the guy the Mets are signing to set up for Edwin Diaz.
Right.
And this is something that's been talked about for a while. When Jeff Passan put out that mega piece, 2 or 3 weeks ago, he wrote in there, the Mets would like to have Edwin Diaz and Devin Williams. Andy Martino was on SNY Mets Hot Stove last week talking about the Mets' interest in Devin Williams and said that it is very real that they can have Diaz and Devin Williams. So now the deferrals, as you mentioned, bring the money down to just under 15 million, like 14 and change. There is nothing stopping the Mets from giving Edwin Diaz the contract that they want to give him. My perspective here is I don't think this drastically changes how the Mets are going to look at Edwin Diaz. If Edwin Diaz is going to go get 5 years and $110 million from somebody, I don't think the Mets probably would have done that even if they didn't have Devin Williams. So I don't think that alters necessarily their pursuit here, but it just adds a level of protection. And when it comes to the reliever market, Raisel Iglesias off the board, Ryan Helsley off the board. Granted,
it moved.
The Mets weren't. Yeah, it moved. If Devin Williams signed with somebody else, you're down to Robert Suarez, Pete Fairbanks, and Edwin Diaz. And if you don't land one of those guys, meaning Suarez or Fairbanks, and Diaz gets that mega deal somewhere, then you're left with nothing. So the Mets have, I think, properly protected themselves, but that should in no way, shape, or form affect how aggressive they should be. And I want to see and do an emergency pod with you, Connor, where we're talking about a Mets bullpen based around Edwin Diaz, now Devin Williams, which is incredibly exciting, and then AJ Minter and Brooks Raley, and then they could build from there. That is the makings of a bullpen that's going to take the Mets from a 2025 that worked out quite poorly to a 2026 that you could go in much more optimistically.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way. This is definitely one where you want to see the full picture painted here, but another step in the right direction during the Mets offseason in terms of being proactive, getting ahead of the market, and we'll kind of see if they finish the job in terms of building this bullpen. So now you get to hear the rest of Joe and I's show where we discuss everything from the Mets clubhouse to a lot of those deals that have already happened. And of course, answering plenty of your mailbag questions. So here you go. What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style. 3 different ways to make every driving occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac. The all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade IQ, Vistic Optic, and Lyric. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. I'm your host, Connor Rogers, joined as always by my co-host, Joe DeMayo. And one little note here, don't worry, everybody. We're both in casual sweatshirts. No battles over fashion on this show tonight. Just a little warning at the top. Joe, how are you? No friction here on the Mets Pod. No chilly vibes.
Connor, it couldn't be further from chilly vibes. I recognize just in the general sense, you have more fashion than I do, but I have not once yet held it against you.
That's
not
right.
yet.
And that is why you are my co-host. The offseason is quiet. We do need to find a little noise. I mean, Joe, I think people are going to want our thoughts on it, no matter how much they buy into it or don't buy into it. Francisco Lindor versus Jeff McNeil. This wouldn't be the first time. Things aren't all warm and fuzzy between those two. Lindor versus Soto a little bit, which is more of just different kind of guys rather than it seems like actual friction here. But Joe, what do you make of this kind of stuff? Because no matter what people believe or don't believe, right? They might think, oh, this is overblown, or, oh, yes, there was a problem. The bottom line is the Mets greatly underachieved last year. And there was plenty of stretches where something just felt off with the team, considering all of the talent they had. And David Stearns has already struck big. And I'm not in any way saying Brandon Nimmo is responsible for any of this. But the bottom line is Brandon Nimmo was a part of this core. And it did feel like a big shakeup in a sense of a guy that's been here for a while, and moving him might have surprised some people. And most importantly, Joe, it doesn't feel like the last notable name that'll be moved out of this team.
I agree, Connor. I don't think Nimmo was the last. And when it comes to the Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor of it all, because I think this is 2 separate stories just kind of jammed into one.
Right.
I mean, let's be honest. I don't think Lindor and McNeil are sending Christmas cards or holiday greeting cards to each other during this time of year. They had a reported supposed physical altercation a couple of years ago. So color me not surprised that if it got to the point that these guys would potentially get physical, that they're going to have more issues in the future. So that being a thing is not surprising at all. And I don't think related to this necessarily, but just related to the way the roster is constructed, I don't think Jeff McNeil has a high likelihood of being on the 2026 Mets. And this whole relationship with him and Lindor, I'm sure it's impacted the clubhouse to some degree. Reality is you don't want to see your teammates arguing, fighting, whatever the case may be. And I think the time for McNeil here is probably over with the acquisition of Marcus Semien. Sure, you could talk yourself into Jeff McNeil as the opening day left fielder until Carson Bench is ready, or there's people that will mention first base. To me, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So, yeah, the whole McNeil, just kind of like, okay, they don't like each other. We know. Nothing new. Okay, it's technically new that we didn't know this situation happened, but Lindor and McNeil's relationship is no secret.
Yeah, that's nothing is shocking there. And McNeil is he wears his emotions on his sleeve, obviously at times. And Lindor, for the great competitor that he is, there's certain times where, hey, maybe he's the future captain of the team. There's also been, I thought it was, notable when Soto was saying how loudly Marte is kind of the real leader of the team. It just feels like with Lindor and McNeil, this is not surprising to the point because we've already known about it. And more importantly, Joe, like this is kind of what it all comes down to. Teams are generally happy when they're winning, right? And Juan Soto did his part during last year. Nobody can Google for the rest of their lives 2025 Juan Soto and be like, oh man, that's why the Mets didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah.
Jeff McNeil for a couple of years now, Joe, it always feels like whether it's a tale of two halves or 1 month, oh, it's old Jeff McNeil. Another month, God, Jeff McNeil can't be starting for this team. Lindor is a notoriously streaky guy. I think at the end of the day, there'll be so much chatter this offseason about David Stearns brought in this guy into the clubhouse. And Marcus Semien, there's no denying. Everybody that's ever been around him says nothing but great things about him. And I think he will be a positive for the clubhouse. But what will be the most positive outcome for this clubhouse, Joe, is if they build a winning baseball team. And moving on from McNeil, to me, and I think you agree with this as well, is more likely than not a step to building a better baseball team than what was the 2025 Mets. And you and I share the belief, as much as we applaud what Brandon Nimmo did for this franchise, great guy, had plenty of good seasons, it felt like the best version, a couple steps towards the best version of next year's Mets was probably opening the spot that Brandon Nimmo occupied, whether that's the long term of Carson Bench or whether that's a splashier move in the offseason. So I'm not denying that any of these clubhouse problems or things aren't warm and fuzzy between everyone. But to me, Joe, the bigger picture is just build a winning team. And this is never a conversation. If the Mets made the playoffs last year, we're probably not even having this conversation.
Connor, couldn't have said it any better. I summed it up in a tweet because I didn't want to get into the whole discourse over the weekend. I put out one thing and one thing only. I just said, get the good players and win. That solves everything. That's really what this comes down to.
Right.
The 2024 Mets had potentially, if you listen to people, the best clubhouse ever, basically. And part of that was that they won. The roster was not drastically different in 2025 than it was in 2024. Yes, you take out Jose Iglesias, and there's no denying the impact that Iglesias had on the 2024 Mets. But what the impact he really had, it wasn't him having an OMG concert after an Apple game on Friday night. It was he hit 340 and played every day at second base. That was the real impact. Iglesias goes to the Padres, hits 100 points lower. OMG didn't come and make the Padres into a deep playoff contender. They did the same thing as they always did. And when you think about the Juan Soto part, because we have to at least touch on that, look, these are just two different guys. Lindor is more boisterous, more outgoing. He's the one that wants to hug everybody, and that's his kind of personality. And
Right.
Soto is a little more recluse, and despite being a superstar that he is in his own right, and obviously that netted him $750 million, Soto legitimately wants to come to the park when he has to be there, do his work, get on base 3 or 4 times, maybe pop a homer, go home to his family, go to sleep, and do it all over again.
Right.
He's not into the whole pomps and circumstance. I don't think Juan Soto is even there to make great friends. And that is just his personality. And some people are that way and some aren't. Let us not forget when he was signing with the Mets. Hey, Juan, did you talk to any of your Yankee teammates? Oh, no. They didn't even have his phone number. Like, and at the time, us Met fans were like, ha, 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 Juan Soto didn't actually like anybody on the Yankees. He didn't even give them his phone number.
What do you mean?
Yeah. And he just picked the Mets. He wanted nothing to do with the Yankees. Maybe that's just who Juan Soto is. He's not there to make friends. He's there to win baseball games. And when you're building a clubhouse of 26 individuals, you kind of need those differing personalities.
That's
where
right.
This person does this person does this. In an ideal world, Juan Soto and Francisco Lindor, your 2 highest paid players, your 2 best players. Like, ideally, they're the best of friends. But I don't get the vibe that there's like Juan Soto dislikes Lindor. I just think they're different and they kind of respect each other's point of view. And hey, they're going to be together for a long time. So there's also the very real chance that the relationship will get better over time.
Well, Joe, you just summed up the differences perfectly between these two, riffs or whatever we want to call it. Jeff McNeil isn't a good enough player anymore where it is worth keeping him and Francisco Lindor on the infield together anymore. That's the reality. And they do technically work together with the way they play, or they need to work together. Juan Soto, besides throwing the ball in from the outfield, is not standing and communicating nonstop with Francisco Lindor on the dirt. And Juan Soto is one of the best players in the sport. And Francisco Lindor is still a damn good shortstop. And if the team wins, you'll never even notice anything between those two. But McNeil not contributing enough to winning anymore, and you compare, obviously, look at Lindor, who's the more productive player, but also look at the contract situation. Like, there's a button you could press, right? I always say this, especially in football, a lot of times it happens with coaches and quarterbacks. With quarterback contracts, the coach is the button you could usually press to fire someone. Unfortunately for Jeff McNeil right now, or maybe fortunately, maybe he wants a fresh start somewhere. With how manageable his money is and the fact that he's just not a good enough player that you feel like you need to keep around anymore, Joe, he's the button that they could press on this team, just even to a lesser degree than Nimmo, because while Nimmo wasn't a good enough offensive and defensive threat anymore that you felt like you had to keep him, Nimmo had the crazier contract to move, and they found a way to get that one done. So what makes you think that they won't do that with Jeff McNeil?
It's not going to be crazy difficult to move McNeil. I don't think.
No.
I don't think you're going to get a ton for him. But it's 1 year and $15 million. And you know what? Maybe David Stearns is creative. I just want to bring up John Heyman wrote, I think it was over the weekend, but Thanksgiving and this time of year, just all the days bungled together. He mentioned the Mariners and the Pirates as a couple teams that could be interested in McNeil. And that just got my brain a churning. Like, maybe the Mets trade Jeff McNeil and a couple prospects to the Pirates, and they bring in Mitch Keller, a guy to come and pitch and stabilize like the middle of the rotation.
Right.
Mariners, like, I don't think they're going to trade any of their starters for a deal based around McNeil, but I don't think the Mets are going to struggle to move McNeil. To your point, moving Brandon Nimmo was a much taller task, and he found a way to do it. Granted, that might have been the only deal in which he was going to be able to move Nimmo, and that's why it got done as early as it did. Because it was that or nothing. McNeil, I think there'll at least be a couple suitors out there that have interest. The reality is some of these teams, like, I know we talk about McNeil not necessarily being good enough, and I think he's not good enough for where the Mets want to be, but he's an everyday Major League Baseball player. So there are teams that are in a different position than the Mets that probably are like, all right, we'll take on McNeil. He had a over 800 OPS for most of the year until he started the deal, I guess, with everything that came with the thoracic outlet syndrome that he had to deal with. That's seemingly not going to impact him for next year. But yeah, McNeil, there's going to be a little bit of a market, and we'll see kind of how that transpires. And the fun part, Connor, is we're less than a week till the winter meetings. This is when these next week, 2 weeks into 3 weeks, like right before Christmas, is really going to be the hotbed of the winter where I think you're going to see a ton of activity.
Well, let's go around the league, not just to kind of recap what's happened, but there's a trickle effect here, Joe, probably with the Mets business workings as well. Dylan Cease is the big move so far. The Blue Jays gave him a 7-year, $210 million deal to really fortify their rotation. One, Joe, were you surprised by this number? And two, I mean, I'll just say it. I think it's great to see Toronto aggressive after they were so close to winning the World Series that they're going out there and saying, we look at Cease as a guy that makes his starts. We believe in some positive regression going forward because of all the underlying numbers and getting out in front of free agency in a way that not many teams do.
I was surprised it went to 7 years. The length is more surprising. Yeah, surprising that he got that term, but he's not an old guy. He's shown to be reliable with innings and strikeouts. The $30 million a year, okay. Like, I could see it. He's either the first or second best starting pitcher on the market, and starting pitching on the free agent market gets paid. That's just how it works. And as you said, Toronto putting the pedal to the floor. Good for them. They make the World Series kind of unexpectedly. That's not the time to sit back and say, okay, that was a good run.
We overachieved. No.
Now you go for it. And so good for them. Would I have wanted the Mets necessarily to give a 7-year, $210 million contract to Dylan Cease? No, probably not. But look, this is the test here of just the way pitching is evaluated now versus a few years ago. Even you don't have to go all that far back. The guy that posted an ERA over 4.5 got 7 years and $210 million because they look and they go, reliable for innings, check. Misses bats, check. Under the hood, everything seems good. I don't care what his ERA was. We're going to make him better. That's what these modern day pitching coaches and pitching apparatuses for organizations think that they can do. And Cease is going to a really good organization in Toronto, and it puts pressure on other teams in the American League East because this isn't the first move that Toronto's going to make. And then on the Mets side, takes a top free agent off the board. If the Mets want to play in free agency, because there is some question, at least, who's actually available in the trade market, it's sounding less and less likely that Tarek Skubal is going to be available. Freddie Peralta might not be available. And as these names trickle off, at what point, Connor, as the Mets, are you like, the best move might be to look at Framber Valdez, or the best move might be to look at Michael King or somebody in free agency where it's, we need to get a real upgrade in this rotation one way or another. And if it's not there in the trade market, you can't just say, well, there wasn't an ace, so we did nothing.
We did nothing, right.
Yeah, they still have to make a significant add. And Valdez, I think, is a very interesting case that maybe we could have an extended talk about at some point. But I think he's somebody that the Mets do have interest in. And with the most recent acquisition of Marcus Semien, I think that makes Valdez even more of a fit as the extreme ground ball pitcher that he is.
All right, we have plenty of pitching news, and this one actually has to do with somebody currently on the Mets roster, Kodai Senga. This is per Will Salmon, friend of the show, does a great job covering the team for The Athletic. Kodai Senga recently informed the Mets that he preferred to stay with the team as opposed to being traded somewhere else. Will also said after experiencing injury, poor performance, and a demotion last season, Senga is said to want to reestablish himself as a top starter in the Mets rotation. Senga, who made just one start last year because of injuries, feels an obligation to the organization and its fans. Nevertheless, he also understands the business. So a lot to break down here, and we'll get into more of it. Senga has a limited trade clause, Joe. He could block a trade to 10 teams, which, trust me, that means the Mets can find a team willing to take on Kodai Senga because there's just not enough to diminish his market, and he's very affordable. I think, Joe, it's nice to hear. It's nice that Senga feels that way. I think the reality is with the Mets here, with David Stearns, if he ran this back and it went how it went this year, it would feel a little bit of like fool me once, shame on you, fool
Yeah.
me twice, shame on me. And I think Mets fans have been really harsh on David Stearns because how the pitching failed them this year. But I think there'd be even less sympathy if you went into this year and say Senga makes 8 starts or makes 10 starts. And
Yeah.
I just think, Joe, that the Mets are going to value not only a higher ceiling in their rotation, but something that gives you a higher ceiling is availability. And I think that makes Senga the obvious guy out.
I really think, Connor, that the Mets actually want to target a higher floor, because when you're talking higher ceiling,
That's a really good point. Yeah.
It's hard to get a higher ceiling than Kodai Senga. We need to not forget, before he went down with that hamstring injury, his ERA was like 1.5. And it wasn't 1.5 for a couple weeks. It was 1.5 for a couple months.
No, you're absolutely right.
So Senga has sky high upside, which I think adds a layer of complication to this. It's 2 years and $28 million. Dylan Cease just signed for 7 and 210. You're talking about $30 million a year for someone like Framber Valdez, or Michael King's going to get 25 plus. You're talking about these pitchers are going to be available in free agency. They're going to double what Kodai Senga's entire commitment is over the next 2 years. That to me says, if you're David Stearns, this isn't a Kodai Senga's got to go move. This should be a valuable trade commodity. When we talk about the Mets trading for guys, we talk about Sandy Alcantara and the Mets. Oh, they take the risk, and so what? Give up Brandon Sprode and Jet Williams and so on. But Kodai Senga, the expectation is that the Mets are just ridding themselves of him. That can't be the outcome. So I know David Stearns knows that, and they need to extract some value here. And to your point, I think big picture, there was just so much that goes into Kodai Senga that I wonder if the Mets
they're just done
ready.
Yeah,
I wonder if they're done. The extra days, the meticulous with the mechanics, like he'll just shut everything down. There's a whole lot that goes into it, but I appreciate that Kodai wants to stay a Met. I love watching Kodai Senga pitch when he's good and healthy. But the Mets might be in a situation where the best move for the organization, this is not a Kodai Senga is bad conversation. It's we need to change the outlook of this rotation, and we will get upside somewhere else, and we will maybe replace Kodai Senga with a higher floor guy. Because the Mets need reliable innings, and if there's one thing you cannot rely on Kodai Senga for, it is innings. And David Stearns said as such in his postseason presser. He basically said, yeah, we'd be foolish if we thought we were getting 30 starts out of Senga. So, yeah, this feels like a tough outcome, but I want to just make it abundantly clear that this should not be looked at as he's just got to go get what you can for him situation.
No, I think you nailed it. And I'll correct myself. I said last year, obviously in 2024, that he made one start. He made 22 starts last year. It was just the fashion that he did it in, where you're right, Joe. And when you're keeping up, when Mets fans are obsessed, so I know most of them are like this. When you're keeping up with the day by day of this team, everything feels like extra labor with Senga. Oh, we have to schedule the rotation like this. He doesn't feel right now, but we don't know why he doesn't feel right now. And he's not effective right now, but we know when he's at his best. I mean, this guy has one of the best pitches in baseball. He can be untouchable. But yes, I agree with you, Joe, that it just feels like, one, that he is actually a valuable, movable asset. And two, it's another one where it's like a lot of teams around baseball think Brandon Nimmo will help them, think Jeff McNeil will help them, think Kodai Senga will help them. And they might be right. But the Mets have tried with all of those guys. And there's been a lot of moments where it was working, but they've come up short for various reasons. And with Senga, it is absolutely health and availability and durability related. And it's, correct me if I'm wrong here, Joe, but because I think the argument from some people might be, well, if you feel that way, why don't you go into the year with him more as a back end guy than relying on him as a front end guy? But isn't it kind of hard to build the rotation a certain way with or without him. Like, you need to know we either have Senga in it and we're setting up the rest days like this until he gets inevitably hurt, and now we need to fill the rotation differently. It just feels like a lot to make work. And yes, the ceiling might be worth it in some ways, but it's probably something that they talked themselves into last year. And once again, it kind of blew up in their face a little bit.
It's difficult to manage a rotation when you have someone that requires that extra day, and it's non-negotiable, really. Like a guy like Yoshinobu Yamamoto prefers to pitch on the extra day of rest, but get to the playoffs and he'll pitch tomorrow after pitching today. It's just different personalities and different ways of going about it. It's not a diss at Senga. And also, if you're the Mets, if you want to make 2 additions, and Will Salmon has reported this as well, if the Mets want to make 2 additions to the rotation, somebody needs to exit the rotation. They aren't getting rid of Clay Holmes. They aren't getting rid of Sean Manaea. Noel McLean is a part of this rotation. Maybe you talk yourself into trading David Peterson instead of Senga if you really don't get anything any good for Senga. But I find it hard to believe that there isn't a team out there that's going to see he pitched to a 1.5 ERA for the first couple months of the season, got hurt, came back, and it wasn't great, that I can't make that work. That's what these teams think. So, yeah, I think it's a lot to deal with from the Mets standpoint as far as maneuvering a rotation and maneuvering a pitching schedule with Senga, and it might just be time to let that be somebody else's problem.
All right, another actual move, much like Cease, although in a different light. We got some news on the reliever market. Goodbye to Ryan Helsley. He signed a 2-year deal that did include a player opt-out with the Orioles. This was a 2-year, $28 million deal. So Helsley, Joe, who just never found it with the Mets after having such a great year with the Cardinals, ends up getting not a ton of term, but still big money on the market early.
Good for him. I mean, Ryan Helsley, I don't have any ill will towards him. I know it worked out poorly, but this is a guy that showed up and worked and tried to figure out the issues with the pitch tipping and everything that was going on. And the sad part is we forget about it because just the end of the season went so poorly. It seemed like he was finally starting to come out of it. His last 3, 4, 5 outings, he started to string together and look a little more like Ryan Helsley. The unfortunate reality was it was too little too late.
It was too late.
And frankly, he personally blew too many games that didn't, help the Mets cause. And that's one of those things that when you go to the trade deadline and you want your general manager or president of baseball operations to make a big swing, trading for Ryan Helsley was a big swing. And I know that it didn't work out. And a lot of people think that David Stearns was trying to outsmart the world. That was him just being a standard guy trying to get the best possible reliever that he could. And it didn't pan out. And now Helsley gets to go to Baltimore, which is a young team with potential. And it sounds like he's going to get the opportunity to close there. So maybe it's a more comfortable spot for him. And maybe New York just wasn't the right fit. And sometimes you don't know if New York is the right fit until somebody comes and gives it a shot. So good for Ryan Helsley. Wish him the best. Wish it worked out better in the second half for the Mets, but here we are, and good for him.
Yeah, I'm with you as well. It just kind of shows, though, the reliever market always strong for guys that have closed games with a high level of success before, even if they're coming off a little bit of a slump. Our last bit of actual MLB news, and this feels a little old by now, but there's a trickle effect that's current. Trent Grisham accepted the qualifying offer. I personally think the Yankees were surprised by this, Joe. I think they were hoping for the draft picks, and instead they get Trent Grisham for about $22 million a year instead, coming off of a career year, especially in the power department. Do you think this means anything for Cody Bellinger? We know the Yankees are going to do what they can to bring him back, especially with how important Bellinger is to that team. Defensive versatility. He's got pop. He hit well in that ballpark. But it is fascinating. The Yankees, as we've seen before, Joe, are not this unlimited kind of spending team. They do have limits, and that's a pretty fat number for Grisham to take up in part of their outfield again.
Almost the opposite of a team without limits. Their owner talks about wanting to lower payroll, has mentioned
It's unfair to other teams competing.
Mentioning
Wild
the salary
quote.
mentioning a salary cap just, I don't know, blows my mind. But this isn't the Yankees pod. That's for somebody else to talk about.
Yeah, have fun with that combo.
Yeah. What this means, Connor, for the Cody Bellinger is it's no guarantee that he's back with the Yankees. Right. And they have Aaron Judge obviously in a corner and Trent Grisham at $22 million. Like it or not, he's probably the Yankees opening day center fielder. That leaves one outfield spot, and they have young players like Jason Dominguez. They have young players like Spencer Jones that ideally you'd like to give opportunities to. And maybe they just have to wait another year and the Yankees sign Bellinger. But I think this opens it up for the Mets if they have interest. And I personally am not on the Cody Bellinger train. To me, the splits are scary, the home road splits.
I agree with the splits, man. It's very eye-opening. And for those that aren't aware, Joe, it's just been, he's not a product of Yankee Stadium. That's not fair to Bellinger, but he's a star-ish player with the Yankees.
Yeah, he's a star at Yankee Stadium, and he's just like pretty good as a player away from there. And I'm sure if you just took him out of Yankee Stadium full-time, his full-time numbers wouldn't equate to just what the road splits are. It'd probably be a little bit better. But I also look at it too, Connor. You just found your way out of 5 years of Brandon Nimmo. Is the prudent move just to go jump in and say, here's 6 years of Cody Bellinger or 7, whatever it takes? To me, that feels like not the right way necessarily to go about it. But I think Bellinger is now an open case to anybody, and maybe the Mets are more interested than I am, and they see the value of his versatility, and maybe he's a backup option for first base for them if Pete Alonso is not to work out. Maybe they look at Bellinger more as a first baseman that can play the outfield rather than a straight up, hey, Brandon Nimmo's gone, we need a left fielder, Cody Bellinger's a left fielder, boom, done. Like, I don't think that's how they're going to look at it, but it opens up Bellinger's market to the Mets, to maybe even going back to the Dodgers. Like, it opens it up, and the Yankees now have some pressure on them to make decisions.
All right, let's hit the mailbag for our Down on the Farm, as we always do. This week, Down on the Farm is presented by Binghamton University, the best public university in the Northeast. All right, this one is from Kimball the Nimble on YouTube. Who is in the minors that can be regular relief contributors to the pen?
Connor, there's currently not a ton of serious relief prospects, I would say. We talked about Dylan Ross, I believe, a couple of weeks ago on this show. But he's a guy that got called up to the Mets the last couple of days of the season, didn't pitch.
Collected dust on the bench.
Hung out, got a good paycheck for a couple of days too. So good for Dylan Ross. And he's certainly going to be in competition for a spot in the opening day bullpen. And it's a splitter in the low 90s. It's a fastball that'll touch triple digits. Got to iron out some control and command, but he has a chance to be impactful. You want to look at Ryan Lambert, who pitched with Double-A Binghamton. And we told the story during the spring breakout game about how he just used to just eat like 30 raw eggs or drink 30 raw eggs, and that would just help him bulk up. And that's how he learned to throw 100 miles an hour. And he is your prototypical power right-hander, throws a fastball 97 to 99, touch 100, wipe out hard gyro slider, and that's it. Another guy, got to work on the control a little bit, got to work on the command, but another option. And the last one to throw in for fun, Nate Lavender returned to the Mets organization after the whole Rule 5 fiasco with the Rays, where he was gone. But now Nate Lavender is back. He'll be in AAA Syracuse, not on the 40-man roster. But as you go through 162 games and use somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 to 50 pitchers a year, I think there's a very real chance that you'll see Nate Lavender throw a pitch for the Mets this year.
You're listening to the Mets Pod, presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Subscribe to the Mets Pod at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SMY's YouTube channel, or wherever you get your podcast. All right, Joe, let's get into the full mailbag here. How about a little Tatsuya Imai doubleheader Brian Mitty asked on Twitter, will the Mets be in on Imai? And does the fact that he wants to be the only Japanese player on the team make things harder since Senga is still here? Well, I think you got the answer to the second part already, because Joe and I don't think Senga will be here. Calidor, though, also asked on Twitter, are the Mets serious in pursuing Imai, or is it more of only if the price is right or the offseason unfolds in a certain way? Does he have legitimate upside in the MLB with the proper developmental help? Well, Joe, let's start with even though I kind of said, like, we don't think Senga will be here. I know he spoke out about kind of wanting to take on the Dodgers, which was really cool. This guy has, as the kids would say, some aura. He's got some sick long hair. He's very confident. He's coming over to the States with his eyes set on taking down the Dodgers. I hadn't seen that it's because he wants to be the only Japanese player on the team. That could be out there, to be fair. Yeah. What did you think of that?
I didn't see like him clearly stating that, but he said he wanted to be able to like tackle learning America on his own. So I don't know if that means
lone wolf.
You know what? And I look at Tatsuya Imai and I watch the way he pitches. I watch the way he looks. I suspect this guy has great fashion. So he's going to.
Here's my prediction. Him and Juan Soto are going to be best friends on the Mets.
Best friends.
Yeah, there's something lining up here.
They're gonna be like peanut butter and jelly or something like that.
There you go.
But what I will say is, I'm not so concerned about the having another Japanese player. And the reality here too, Connor, is Jeff Passan from ESPN did a thing on Threads, which I didn't know people actually used Threads, but he went on Threads and put 10 updates. I think
Threads exclusive?
Like a Threads exclusive, just 10 different updates. Like
Threads had to pay for this. There's no way.
Here's the people in the mix for Kyle Schwarber, and here's the
who was it? Nobody saw this except you. Literally,
the Mets were on the list. The
nice.
Phillies are considered the favorite, but the Mets are on the list. The Mets were mentioned with Kyle Tucker as well, though it was just like one of the New York teams is how he mentioned it.
Classic Steve Cohen Mets. You're in on every free agent.
Every single one. But what stuck out about what he said about Imai is he said executives believe while his posting deadline is January 2nd, Imai might sign during the winter meetings next week. So if Imai is going to, because the whole posting system, you have 45 days to decide who you're signing with. You're by no means required to take 45 days. So if Imai's signing next week, Kodai Senga might still be a Met next week. Doesn't mean he's a Met in 2026, but he might be one next week. So that could be a part of the conversation. And to the second question, I think the Mets are seriously interested in Imai. Do I think they are going to be the team that is the highest bidder? I'm not so sure about that. You're talking about upwards of a 7 to 8 year commitment. Granted, he's 27, so maybe there's a little more openness there.
Right.
And as far as legitimate upside, he's got the raw stuff that if you are a modern day pitching factory like the Mets are building themselves to be, there's no reason why you can't help him turn into something more than what I have been told and others have mentioned. Projects kind of like a number 3 starter, but he has a fastball that'll touch 99. He's got like the backward slider, like just goes arm side, kind of like Trey Savage has. He's tinkered with a splitter and a Vulcan change. So there's some things to work with Imai. And does he have potential to be a frontline guy? Sure. He's 27. There's room to grow. Maybe not physically. He's not the most physically daunting individual, but from a stuff standpoint, you can really refine some things and maybe get even more out of him than you would expect coming over from Japan.
How about this one? Thank you for the 5-star review. Oliver Perez was underrated is the username. We like that. Thank you for the 5-star review. Yeah, keep fighting the good fight.
Someone's gotta.
Yeah, that's right. And it's you. But now the Bet Spot has your back. Had a bit of a wild idea, but did want to litigate it with you guys. Know you've discussed signing and moving Pete to more games at DH. What are the chances of the Mets making Juan Soto more of a permanent DH? His defensive metrics are equally as bad as Pete, and we could pursue a more defensive-minded first base, Hoskins, O'Hearn, Santana, and pair that person with a bona fide corner outfielder. Dare I say Kyle Tucker, or more realistically, Cody Bellinger? So, Joe, number one, this isn't wild. I'm not calling this egregious or anything at all. I just think the Mets want to squeeze maybe at least 5 of the 15 years out of Soto in right field, and they already got one down. And I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't think it was that bad, honestly. I really didn't. I didn't find myself like, oh, there goes Soto in right field again. Like, can't believe how much this is costing us. I think if the Mets were a more buttoned up team defensively at the other positions, you would be like, hey, you got to live with it somewhere. And it's just good to have, it's good to not have DH clogged yet. It just feels early.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Soto from a defensive standpoint, like range leaves some to be desired. You would like to see more range in right field. And there are times where, and maybe it's him preserving himself a little bit. If he doesn't think he's going to get to something, he ain't running as hard as he can after it. He's just letting it go, and he'll take it off the wall, and that'll be that. But as far as being a full-time DH right now, David Stearns has made it more than clear he is going to be the right fielder. And when you have a player that performs offensively the way that he does, you can sacrifice one spot from run prevention as long as you tailor it with a good center fielder next to him and hopefully a good left fielder next to that individual that the center fielder could shade a little bit towards right, and that'll help negate some of the range issues with Soto, because otherwise he's got a great arm. Like Juan Soto,
great arm.
He'll throw out runners. So it's not that he's like defensively incompetent. It's just doesn't have the most range, and he's not going to necessarily sprint after every single ball. I do think eventually DH is probably in Juan Soto's future, or heck, maybe in first base. Like he likes to play around there. But in the year 2026, which is I think where we really need to hone in our focus, Juan Soto is going to be the Mets right fielder. David Stearns said it point blank, so I don't expect anything to change there. As far as the names like Kyle Tucker and Bellinger, who we just talked about, if the Mets want to pursue those guys, there's no reason that they can't just be the left fielder and Juan Soto is the right fielder. So that they'll be able to make those pieces work if that's what they choose to do. And Soto's just going to be standing right in front of that Coca-Cola corner for, like you said, at least a couple more years.
All right, this one from William J. Mazza. Do you think Stearns would be willing to go 4 years for $88 million for Diaz, which is 1 year less than what has been reported he's looking for, but at a higher AAV? I don't think the Mets are going to let Diaz walk. I think they've just played more hardball than we expected, where, the Mets last time got this done with Diaz before free agency even began. And this time it didn't happen because I think Stearns is a little bit of a tougher negotiator with markets that he's careful with, which relief pitching is absolutely one of those markets, Joe, where maybe they don't believe 5 years is out there for Diaz like Diaz wants. And it might not make you feel good as a fan because you don't want to imagine a Mets life without Edwin Diaz closing games for you right now. But if this results in the Mets having Diaz on a 4-year deal instead of having to give into the 5-year deal, it's pretty shrewd, Joe. As much as we love Edwin Diaz and we don't want to see him go anywhere, that's kind of the power the Mets have. And we say this almost on every show, but when you have Steve Cohen, if a player wants to be with your organization, and Edwin Diaz wants to be with the Mets, we know that.
Yep.
You kind of hold that last move in your pocket in negotiations like these where, oh man, we got to the winter meetings and the Blue Jays, although they just gave Dylan Cease a ton of money, decided to go to the 5 years. We got to go to the 5 years. But you found out you didn't just go, here's the 5 years. Like it's called negotiating against yourself. And no, it doesn't feel good with a player that's beloved, right? Like Edwin Diaz, but it might not feel good now. 4 years from now, you might be like, you know what? Kind of glad we don't have a 5th year of Edwin Diaz in his late 30s at $24 million or whatever it is.
The thing about David Stearns and what he's showing, and the evidence was just the way he shipped Brandon Nimmo out of town.
Right.
He is not going to be sentimental towards anyone. I know that there's a lot of people that say, oh, David Stearns will never pay a reliever a long-term big money deal. I think he realizes the value of Edwin Diaz. Does that mean,
right,
to to your point, maybe he's not going to give him the 5-year and $102 million deal that he wants. And guess what? There might be a chance that no one else does. So
That's the point.
He has to be able to survey the market. And to be honest with you, the question from William here, that sounds like a perfect contract to me. I think that's something that would work for both parties, where Edwin Diaz becomes clearly the highest paid reliever in baseball on an AAV standpoint. The Mets save a year. And you know what? Maybe you throw like a vesting option or something like that for a 5th year that kind of helps bridge that gap. And I'm hopeful that this is going to work out. I personally would be surprised if we got a Andy Martino tweet or a Jeff Passanbaum that said, breaking news, Edwin Diaz signed with blank team that's not the Mets. And I'm hopeful it resolves itself sooner than later, because I'm antsy like a lot of fans are. But it's David Stearns' job to just survey the market, know what to do. And as long as the Mets bring Edwin Diaz back, I'm not going to be the one coming on this show complaining about the contract that he gets.
That's it for me as well. I want Edwin Diaz back. I'll be the first one on this podcast, if they lose him, to be like, wow, this is one of the first moments that I question David Stearns and even lose a little bit of trust in David Stearns, because I don't think the Mets should get too cute here, but I also have no problem with them letting Diaz go see what his market is and then revisiting what his next contract will look like. All right, our last question is from Cliff at Real NY Teams on Twitter. Is Luisangel Acuna a viable center field option if Benj doesn't start the season with the Mets? Or are the Mets playing Acuna in center field and winter ball just to build his trade value? So, I mean, it feels like more of, not even just trade value, Joe, but the fact that we could sit here on this podcast and feel like it's hard to project Luisangel Acuna as an everyday major league player. It is. And when teams aren't projecting you that way, you need to do everything you can to warrant a roster spot. And you know how you do that? More often than not, you either are your best bat off the bench, and we know he's not that, or you are a plus glove at multiple spots with high-end athleticism. And he's definitely a plus glove on the dirt. He's definitely got high-end athleticism. So if he can add viable center fielder to his resume, Joe, it only helps his major league career. But I don't think it's in the vein of the mold of this is somebody that they think is the long-term answer or even a stopgap at center field on opening day.
No, I don't think the Mets are looking at Luisangel Acuna as a starting player anywhere. I think this just increases his overall value. And if that helps in the right trade, it helps in the right trade. If not, we're talking about trading Jeff McNeil, who theoretically would be a utility player on this Mets roster as currently constructed. Luisangel Acuna could fill that role for significantly less dollars. And we know he could play all over the infield, as you mentioned. And center field is not foreign to him. He got in a couple games in center field in major leagues this past year, and he's played it in the minor leagues. So go ahead and get more center field reps, get more comfortable, and maybe that transitions where, he could handle center field okay. Let's see if he can handle a little bit of left field. And then he becomes that super sub that you can put anywhere on any given day for any given need, whether that's in-game, starting a game. So I just look at this as Acuna is trending in the direction of being a reserve utility player, and the Mets are working to increase his value. And, we'll see how it shakes out, whether that is with the Mets or with another team. But it only helps, as you said, Luisangel Acuna for his major league career. And I think that's overall a good thing.
Yeah, that's the best way to look at it right now. And I mean, listen, the reality is, though, if you are him, and, athletes operate a different way than us just on podcasts projecting players and even how their own teams project them. Like, Acuna's got to be going into the spring and being like, I need to give myself every competitive advantage I can to stick on an MLB roster right now. And that would be, as we sit here before any moves have been made, center field is absolutely one of those avenues for the Mets right now. So, all right, Joe, I feel like I do this every offseason podcast, but do you think next week we will be reacting to any Mets moves?
I think so, Connor. I think
it's in the air right now. I think so too. Maybe nothing crazy, but something major league roster-ish.
the week before the winter meetings actually tends to have some activity. Maybe not, as you said, on the top level of the market. Like, I don't think Kyle Tucker is signing somewhere this week, but I think there can be some movement before the meetings. And 1 week from today, we're going to be smack dab in the middle of the winter meetings. And that's the time where you better keep your phone on not silent, Connor, because the emergency signal could go off at quite literally any time, and we have to be ready for it. So I do predict the next time that you hear our voices, it is because the Mets may have just made a move.
I hope so. Those are always the best podcasts. This is the Mets Pod presented by Tri-State Cadillac. Performance, range, style. 3 different ways to make every drive an occasion. Whatever your reason, there's never been a better time to say, let's take the Cadillac, the all-electric Cadillac family of vehicles, Escalade, IQ, Vistic, Optic, and Lyriq. Visit your Tri-State Cadillac dealer today. And remember to subscribe to the show at Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review with a question, and we'll look for it for a future mailbag. And of course, you can watch the show on SMY's YouTube channel, become a subscriber over there as well. And we will talk to all of you next week.